Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is José Ignacio Torreblanca. I'm the head of the Madrid office of the European Council on Foreign Relations. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you to today's public Zoom webinar, Green Future, How Can Spain Help Europe keep its green transition goals on course through the energy crisis? And for that, we have an amazing lineup. Thank you to Gonzalo Escribano, Joan, Groizard, and María Sicilia for being here. They will be introduced by Susi Dennison, our Senior Policy Fellow and European Power Program Director at the European Council on Foreign Relations, who would be chairing and moderating the session. For all of you who are watching us, there is a chat box on which you can put your questions, which will be put to the speakers after the first round of presentations. We're very happy to have you following us, and we encourage you to use the text box and the chat box function for this. And without, I'm just, happy to see and happy to appreciate how Spain is appreciated as a leader, a believer, and a practitioner in the climate change discussion and also in the energy transition. And with that, I just want to welcome you everyone and give it over to Susi to start this session. Thank you so much and welcome to everybody, and especially for our distinguished speakers. Thank you for being with us one more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nacho. Yes, so I'm Susi Dennison, and I'm really pleased to have the honour of moderating this discussion at this moment. I think there's no need for me to explain to anybody who's chosen to join us why this is such a topical conversation. We are now heading into the winter, when we will see whether or not the steps that we've taken over the last few weeks as Europeans towards building our energy sovereignty are working out. And I think that it's clear for us that the challenge we now have on the table is to try to change our understanding of what sustainable energy security is in this environment. We're keen in this conversation to look at how we can encourage not just a broader set of relationships to underpin the supply of European energy over the longer term, but how we can ensure that we keep the decarbonisation goals on course through this process. This is not just about moving our dependence away from Russia, which is long overdue. This is also about Europe continuing to be able to show climate leadership and keep the level of ambition that was put forward in the European Green Deal, Repower EU energy strategy, and so on online. The reason we've convened this discussion now is we feel that it's crucial to continue to draw attention to the fact that if we sacrifice the long term for the short term, then that isn't energy security at all. So one of the reasons that we wanted to hold this conversation radiating out of Madrid is firstly to look at how Spain can play a role in this transition, in our understanding of what energy security is firstly that obviously we have the Spanish presidency coming up. So there is an institutional moment in which Spain has a chance to steer the conversation around this. But secondly, at ECFR, we've been doing pan-European work looking at the efforts that member states are making in trying to keep this balance between decarbonisation goals and near-term energy supply challenges balanced in the right way. And we found some very interesting projects that Spain and Spanish companies are undertaking with other European states, which we feel speak to this process. So we wanted to draw on the Spanish example, not only as an institutional leader, but also as a potential leader by example that could share best practice with other member states. And as Nacho said, we have a great panel to discuss these issues with. In alphabetical order, we have Gonzalo Escribano, the Climate and Energy Program Director at Elcano Royal Institute. We have Joan Groizard, the Director General for IDAE, the Institute for Diversification and Saving of Energy in English, at the Spanish Ministry for the Ecological Transition. And we have María Sicilia, the Strategy and Planning Director at Enagás. So thank you all very much indeed for joining for us today. We're going to hear introductory comments from each of our three speakers, then facilitate a conversation, give them a chance to react to each other. And then we do want to bring all of those of you who've joined into the conversation with questions and comments. So I'd like, if I may, to turn first to you, Joan, Groizard. Europe finds itself in the midst of an energy crisis, which has major implications for our ability to keep up the work on climate goals at the moment. So from your point of view, how do you feel that we can try to ensure that the emergency actions that we're taking now don't compromise our medium and long-term ability to keep decarbonisation on course? What do you feel are the political and policy safeguards that are needed to do this? And from the point of view of the Spanish government, how do you see the engagement with your other European capitals working? The floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Susi, and thanks to ECFR for the invitation and the opportunity to have this indeed very timely debate. It's in fact, Minister Teresa Rivera, our Minister for Ecological Transition, announced in fact that tomorrow, if everything goes as planned, we will be presenting our contingency plan, our specific plan to respond to the current situation in a more organized way. But there's already plenty that Spain, as you know, as you were well aware, has put on the table in terms of debate, in terms of specific measures, and in terms of a sort of strategic outlook of what we should be doing. For us, and again, I'll quote my minister, because it's a phrase that I think is very useful to have at hand, is that the short, the midterm, and the long term all have something in common. They all start exactly the same day, and that day is today. So it's very important to make sure that whatever you do in the short and the medium term is compatible with the long term and vice versa, because you'll end up having to pay the consequences otherwise. For us, that's extremely important, and so whatever we will be doing, as you will see, for our contingency plan, and that is to respond to the current situation, is perfectly aligned with the energy transition. For us, it's sort of a no-brainer. Obviously, we're not a gas producer, we're not a producer of any other fossil fuels, but we have a huge renewable energy resource in Spain. But I think this is common to most EU member states. At the same time, it's very obvious that for us, high energy prices mean that we need to consume less energy. We need to be able to make the same economic output, the same social welfare with less energy. And we need to have more of it generated by renewables, which, again, as you know, is already the cheapest form of generation. Again, that is the case in Spain, but that is the case in the vast majority of Europe as well. And it's interesting to see some headlines from about a year ago when some media and some analysts were trying to push the idea of a green inflation and the idea that the green transition was increasing prices. And what we're seeing, in fact, is the total opposite. Had we gone a lot further, had we gone a lot faster in terms of decarbonization, in terms of fully pushing out fossil fuels out of our energy mix, we would not be suffering the current situation. For us in Spain, we do realize we're in a more privileged situation when it comes to security of supply compared to other member states. We do not have a direct gas pipeline link to Russia. Our impact is sort of a second order and an indirect order because of increased prices, because of reduced supply and sort of supply and demand issues. And the only supply that comes from Russia to Spain is LNG, which can be replaced by LNG from any other supplies. But again, and I'm sure some of my colleagues on the table will be able to explain a lot more about this, this has not come for free. It is not chance that means that Spain has this high possibility of diversification. Spanish and Portuguese consumers have had to pay for decades for LNG infrastructure, for storage infrastructure, because we have had a lack of infrastructure connecting us to the rest of Europe, meaning we have had to find other ways of other sources of supply, which now means that, you know, if Russia, as has happened, cuts off supply, at least our security of supply is not compromised. So we do face the debate in a slightly different situation, and I am aware that I am speaking from a more comfortable situation than perhaps my colleagues in other capitals, but I think a lot of the messages are very common. And maybe just to finalize, and I'm sure we'll be able to get into a lot more detail, a few of the priorities for us. The main one is protecting consumers, and that's something that we believe the Spanish government has been doing for the last year. And again, I have to say, in some cases, putting forward debates that have only just become sort of acceptable and mainstream in the European context, but which were absolutely taboo. And I think that's the word to use. They were an absolute taboo only just a year ago. with the Commission, with the member states. Now these capitals are moving forward in that debate. So first, protecting consumers. Second, ensuring security of supply. As I was saying, for Spain, that is an easier situation to do, but we understand that we have to act in a context of solidarity, and therefore reducing our consumption and being able to maximize how much of that gas we can share with the rest of Europe is important as well. And obviously ensuring consistency with mid and long-term targets. So those are sort of priorities. This is where we come from. And like I said, I'm sure we'll be able to get into a lot more detail with the questions and so on.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a very clear overview of where the current thinking is, and obviously we'll all be looking forward to the announcements tomorrow on the broader package that you mentioned. I'd like to turn now to Gonzalo Escribano to talk. You look very much at the geopolitics around this, and in my framing, I was talking very much about sort of the European perception of sustainable energy security. But obviously, a lot of that depends on the third country relationships that we build around that. What worries you when you look at the current picture in terms of the way that we are responding to both the near-term energy needs in terms of current supply and the longer term in terms of our Green Deal ambitions, in terms of the potential new vulnerabilities that are out there for us? And what do you see as being the measures that we might put in place to avoid the same sort of dangerous dependencies that we've seen in the fossil fuel era as we move into, hopefully, the next phase?
Okay, thank you, Susi, and thank you so much to ECFR for inviting me, and to Nacho Torreblanca for having people from the university in this kind of debates. It's also interesting. So I got a double hat here. I'm a university professor on public policies, but I'm the head of the Energy and Climate Program at the Elcano Royal Institute, which is a Spanish think tank on international relations. I'll try to give both the, let's see, a public policy approach, but also the external dimension, if I can, being very briefly. What worries me the most? Well, the first thing that worries me the most are internal geopolitics, or European intra-geopolitics. That's what worries me the most. And I mean, the thing about interconnections has been very clearly put forward. That's a clear limitation that limit us a lot, the alternatives we got. I mean, we got mainly, in Spain, we got mainly two possible pathways. We go for an energy union that goes beyond the Pyrenees, or either we go for an energy island when we beat everybody else because we got very low energy prices, hopefully, as Joan has put it forward just a couple of minutes before. So that's the internal geopolitics about interconnections, about completing the internal market, but also other question of internal geopolitics. I mean, what happens with the German huge package? Is it going to somehow alter the internal market? Also, I mean, when we come to, you properly mentioned, and Nacho was saying it, I think that's important, the role Spain has played, in moving the debate. And totally agree with Joan. I remember 1 year ago when not only many member states, but also the European Commission issue a toolbox for, something temporary. And 1 year ago, nobody was thinking that 1 year later we will be in that situation. And now it seems quite unavoidable to intervene in the market because we are in an emergency situation with extraordinary measures. The question is, within this internal geopolitics, and I go immediately to the outside dimension, is which model? Because, I mean, the other day you got the Bruegel paper, you got 8 different models being proposed by different European countries. I just came from the Belgian embassy where they have tried to explain to me this corridor for decent prices, whatever it means. I didn't get it very much, but in any case, you got the Spanish proposal, you got the Greek proposal, you got the Libyan proposal, I mean, all of them. So we have to come to terms to at least, I mean, from 8 different models, perhaps we can narrow it down to a technical debate to 2-3 models, especially not that much in the short run, as in the long run. What will be the role of marginal prices? What will be the role of price signals? And so on and so forth. So I think this internal discussion is also a lot of geopolitics. Internal geopolitics, but they are. Externally, what really worries me is if we are in the search for strategic autonomy, to me, strategic autonomy doesn't mean changing dependence from Russia from Russian gas with dependence from Nigerian gas, or even with US LNG, because for sure we can say that the risk profile or the strategic behavior of the United States is not comparable to that of Russia, and that never the US will use gas or to weaponize energy assets. But what happens if Mr. Trump gets the elections? I mean, already the Biden administration is proposing to restrict both, at least oil exports to the outside. I mean, just a couple of years ago, it was forbidden to export both oil and gas from the States. What happened if in 2 years' time, we got a Trump presidency, we don't got this interest for European partners, the Ukrainian war has been somehow by-sided by Trump or another Republican leadership, and we start to have problems in getting these supplies of expensive, but to some extent secure Russian, US gas. And the same about hydrogen. I mean, if Germany wants to diversify away from Russian gas, when they start to have agreements to import green hydrogen from Morocco, then they start to have the problem with the Western Sahara. So anytime you fly away from a geopolitical problem, you have to be very conscious that you probably will find new ones. Perhaps they are not that hard. Perhaps they are not that, I don't know, stringent to your public policies. But in order to prevent that we replicate or that we follow a path dependent following oil and gas institutions, that rather than having, oil and gas oligopolies, we are going to have hydrogen oligopolies or electricity oligopolies or whatever, that we try to find that we cannot import green hydrogen from countries that do not apply minimum sustainability criteria and human security standards. So for Spain, but not also for Spain, but for Europe on the whole, having a very clear and stringent import sustainability criteria, so we don't start to import hydrogen or electricity that have a huge carbon content or that don't respect human rights or whatever. This will be the kind of institutional setting that now we are starting from the scratch, we can perhaps start to introduce. And I think that will be very much aligned between European values and interests, and for sure also between Spanish values and interests. And if you want, later on we can go on where we are nowadays in this regulatory discussion that I think is very interesting, but I'm sure that Maria is going to deal with it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Gonzalo. And I think there is indeed much more that we can dig into from your helpful overview of what needs to happen to press you a bit on your assessment of how well we're doing against that on the European discussion about those common standards and so on. But yes, let's come back to that, because I'd like to turn now to Maria Sicilia now. For your take, obviously a slightly different perspective coming from the private sector and actually very much in the weeds of a lot of the issues that we've been discussing now. But I'm keen, if you're willing, if you could focus on, from your point of view, what do you see as being the immediate needs that we need to be taking at this point in order to build up this more sustainable energy security? What are the actions that are needed now in order to secure our medium to long term, if you will, in terms of our energy transition? So the floor is yours, and I think you're going to have a presentation showing through the other camera.
Yes, please. Thank you, Susi. Indeed, and thank you to the ECFR to give me the opportunity to present what I think are beyond the short-term remedies that Gonzalo Escribano just described, and as an avoidable need to intervene in the market, from the private sector perspective, what we see is the current energy crisis is not just a short-term problem; it's a strategic issue, and it's an issue for the Europe of today and for the Europe of tomorrow. But due to the little time we have in order to meet our climate targets, we need to get traction in the very short term. I prepare a very brief presentation. If you could show the first slide, because as we all know, the energy landscape has shifted dramatically this year, and the response in the form of the Repower EU plan from the European Union, basically, among other solutions for the longer term, which namely to increase renewables in the system, enhance energy efficiency, and the production of biomethane, gives a crucial role to the development of a hydrogen market by 2030. The Repower EU, the Repower EU plan considers that establishing a European hydrogen backbone of dedicated infrastructure should be one of these strategic priorities in order to be able to replace the role of Russian imports right now in the European energy mix, and for the longer term to decarbonize the natural gas value chain. Next slide, please. The key drivers, according to the Repower EU plan for the development of this cross-border infrastructure, is a supply and demand mismatch between member states. Some of the largest projected hydrogen consumers, such as Germany or the Netherlands, are characterized by a shortfall of renewable resources and also land area to meet their domestic demand, and therefore they already know that it will require substantial imports of hydrogen from other regions or countries. Spain is one of those countries, or in particular is the member state in the European Union with the largest renewable resource, and can produce the largest volumes of green hydrogen in Europe already by 2030, but also by 2050, which, as I say, is crucial to meet the net zero long-term targets. And in this regard, Spain can contribute to Europe's energy transition with the most competitive green hydrogen production in Europe. Next slide, please. I'm running rapidly through the slides because this is just an introduction, but happy to respond to questions. The Mediterranean corridor, in which the Iberian Peninsula and Spain is a crucial partner, means that Spain could contribute to the Repower target of 10 million tons of hydrogen produced domestically by 2030, with at least 2 million tons of exports. I see Gonzalo's face. Indeed, this is a massive challenge. To do so, around 25 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity could be needed, which would require between 14 and 21 billion of investment based on the calculations, on the hypothesis used by the European Commission in its Repower EU document. To power these electrolyzers, around 55 gigawatts of further renewable capacity could be needed, requiring further around 40 billion of investment in wind and solar projects. And just to put this into context, over the last 3 years, Spain's wind and solar capacity grew just by 9.5 gigawatts, according to Red Eléctrica's data. Next slide, please. The development also of a hydrogen pipeline network through the corridor must overcome a number of obstacles, particularly in the initial stages of a market growth. There are several factors that could impede the investment, but just to name three at this point, basically there's no regulatory framework whatsoever. Still in negotiations in the hydrogen and decarbonized gas market package. There is a complex planning and permitting regimes for new build infrastructures in Europe, as we are seeing, and also we lack a certification system to underpin this trade. And just to finish these introductory remarks, from the private industry, what we propose, next slide please, is basically that the Spanish presidency, in order to accelerate the development of the hydrogen network and infrastructures for development of a proper market by 2030, is that the Spanish presidency makes a political objective of the implementation of this key vector for the future. We are convinced that because there's just 7 years time to 2030, we would need to do things at a speed never seen in this industry. 7 years it's a very short term for the infrastructure industry, and therefore top-down commitment, political commitment, and a push from governments will be required if we want to meet the REPowerEU plan objectives and phase out fossil fuel in the medium term. So that's all on my side for the moment.
Thank you very much for that fascinating presentation and actually quite exciting to sort of put forward what might be possible if we make the right decisions and play this right. I want to encourage all participants to think now about the questions you'd like to put forward and put that in the Q&A box. But while you're thinking, I'm going to abuse my position of chair and ask a few of my own to our speakers. Joan, I can't resist coming straight back to you, given that Maria put forward a proposal for what she'd like to see from the Spanish presidency on the hydrogen front. But more broadly and slightly less meanly, I wanted to ask you, from your point of view, well, no, I'll reframe that. From an outsider's point of view, it looks to me that when you look at Maria's chart about the mismatch between supply and demand around Europe at the moment, that European states are doing reasonably well on coming together on the conversation about the demand side and how we manage that collectively, how we pay, how each member state puts forward a contribution to that. But for now, it doesn't look from the outside that the conversation is yet at the level it needs to be in terms of the supply side and willingness to put to pool resources when it comes to thinking about both this winter and the longer term in terms of sharing of supply and managing crises, or at least planning in advance for crises. So I'm interested to hear from your point of view. Is that fair? And if you think it is fair, what do you think it would take to change that picture? And having framed it now, maybe both questions are quite mean to put into you, but I've done it. So.
No, I think they're, thanks, Susie, and I think they're both they both make sense, and I probably know. I definitely don't have that definite answers to those, and I'm keen to hear what my colleagues have to say on those issues. But if I can add maybe my 2 cents on these issues. First of all, let's remember how far, at least in my opinion, how far and how fast the internal governance development of the European Union has moved in the last, well, since the pandemic, basically. We were used to European regulations, European legislation taking years and years from the initial Commission proposal all the way through to the trilogues, all the way to implementation and then transposition to the member states. And now this year we are seeing almost a regulation every month in the energy sector. The speed at which consensus or at least a big almost consensus can be found at the council. How quickly the proposals iterate between member state proposals, commission official proposals, agreements by the council, and so on. So I think we're moving a lot faster because the crisis has made us move faster, and we've learned during the COVID crisis how we had to do this, and I think we're sort of implementing this in the energy crisis situation. I think you're absolutely right when it comes to the demand side, and that's probably sort of easier. I think governments are comfortable understanding what it means for the different demand sectors in their economy, how households and the industrial sector, and how we get security of supply. I think this leads on to the idea of strategic autonomy that Gonzalo put on the table. I think obviously strategic autonomy is not replacing what we now know is an unreliable supply with other what we now think are reliable suppliers. We hope they are, and they will continue to be obviously reliable suppliers, and we'll continue to have long-standing diplomatic and commercial relationships in the long term. That's, I think, what everyone should aspire to. But we know that we have to be prepared for uncertainty. So I think bringing home a lot of that energy dependence, so substituting external energy dependence with domestic, at least at a European level, energy dependence, I think that's sort of a first layer strategic autonomy that we need to move towards. I would add there's a sort of a second, what I would call a second layer strategic autonomy that we need to move towards, and it's, okay, we need the energy to be generated domestically. Do we have the right technology, and do we have the right raw materials to be able to generate that energy domestically as well? So one of the things we've been working on, which is, and maybe less in the spotlight, is a roadmap for the sustainable management of mineral raw materials in Spain. We will have to use lithium, we will have to use cobalt and other minerals, and they have to be mined somewhere, or they have to be extracted from second life, whatever, batteries or other instruments that have been manufactured. So isn't it best if we map what our resources are in Europe, and we ensure, well, reasonable human rights and European labor legislation compatible extraction of these materials, appropriate traceability criteria, and therefore become fully coherent, right? We have certain environmental and social standards in Europe, yet we import stuff that doesn't necessarily, if you follow the full chain, doesn't necessarily comply with this. So that's important. However, I don't think we fully understood that debate or that opportunity needs to happen at a European level. And so I think that map that Maria was showing is a very good example of that. So I think most European member states understand the opportunity of homegrown renewables versus externally imported fossil fuels, at least theoretically. I think most member states' energy and climate plans would probably include mentions along those lines. But at the same time, the European Commission has been trying to push things like European cross-border renewable energy auctions, for example, for years. In fact, it was in the previous renewable energy package. It's in this one. And yet it's been very difficult to get there. So the theory has been there in theory, as I say, in legislation. In practice, it's been very difficult to get hold of that. Obviously, from a Spanish perspective, and we're one of sort of the net potential exporters within a European context of that. We have, as I was saying earlier, a lot of renewable energy resource. We could be sort of net providers of hydrogen and renewable energy in other formats to the rest of Europe. So we need to understand the best way of doing that. I think historically, talking about European collective budgets, European collective debt, European collective economic resources, one way or another, again, has been difficult to build. But again, I think the work that we did with the vaccinations, the work that we did with different healthcare material with COVID, the work that has been done with the recovery and resilience facility and a common instrument such as that. I think there's with all of those, there's ground to be optimistic when it comes to Europe being able to manage challenges in a collective manner. I think we're not there yet. I think we need to continue to implement these thoughts, but I think there's enough instruments and enough pieces on the table, I think, to get us at least part of the way there. I think that'll be my general insight to this issue.
Thank you very much indeed, Joan. Gonzalo, could I come back to you now? I wanted to see if you wanted to react to what Joan has just said, or indeed to Maria's presentation. But I was also sort of keen to hear from you, sticking with the European conversation. You alluded to the German support package and the potential distortive impact of that on the broader European picture. And I wonder if you could say a few words about what, how much of a difference could a sort of a genuine European consultation around these issues make? Is that realistic as a prospect around managing the socio-economic impact at the moment, if we begin to think of this as Europe's problem rather than a national crisis?
Well, I think that at some point, I would like to be wrong on that, but I mean, my prognosis is that in Europe, we are going to have a very hard economic times this winter, So, I mean, hopefully it's not necessary, but as Jan said, we have learned how to implement emergency packages in the European Union, and probably we are going to have something similar to that. So my point is, okay, I mean, Germany has already adopted this huge plan. By the way, it would have been much cheaper buying 2 or 3 LNG, plans than spending all this money. It's crazy. But in any case, I mean, it's the past is the past, and we cannot solve that. So that's on the one side. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is the most important is how we build a resilient European Energy Union, and it has been mentioned by Maria and how we integrate in hydrogen, but it's also not only in physical infrastructures, but also in institutions. I mean, if we are going for a common recovery package, war recovery package or whatever, I mean, we could have told to our German friends and say, hey, can you help a little? So can you wait for a while, because perhaps, I mean, that would have been much better, But on the other way, I mean, we just got the last week the German-Spanish bilateral meeting, and there is a declaration on that. And when you look at the declaration between Spain and Germany, you got 3 points on energy. One, what Maria just said, we want to build this common project of common interest on hydrogen. This is the most, in fact, the only real thing that is in energy in this bilateral action plan. There are 2 more other things on energy. Well, there are some about oceanographic research and other things, and about the food chain and all that, but on energy there are 3. This hydrogen. Secondly, a working group between Spain and Germany in order to discuss regulatory issues. That's very important to try to come to some kind of convergence, I mean, narrowing down the 8 different models we got today to perhaps 3 or 4, that will be an advance at least, on a technical basis, not on a political basis. Also, the idea of working more on interconnections in Europe between Spain and Germany. Perhaps we can foster this idea there. But to me, the most important thing as today, from a Spanish perspective, allow me to present what could be a Spanish position. I'm not saying it's the Spanish position, but what I can see as a possible Spanish, stakeholder position is we got 2 scenarios. We go for an energy union, and then we want to integrate, and we share our cost reduction, and we contribute to Europe's energy security and economic competitiveness with our renewables, storage capabilities, all we got. If the Pyrenees remain close and we cannot integrate and contribute to European energy security, energy competitiveness, and energy transition, so perhaps the only option we got, if our French friends doesn't allow us to go through the Pyrenees, is to play the energy island card that I don't like myself, because I'm very much pro-European, so I prefer to be integrated. But in that case, we will be isolated, we will get very low energy costs, and we will be able to attract a lot of energy intensive industries. I'm not dreaming that we are going to attract VNW from Germany, because there are many other factors of localization, industrial localization. But for sure, for new industries, for petrochemicals, for people who wants to work here, for telework or whatever, I think Spain, if we are not being permitted to integrate in the European Union, we will have very serious competitiveness advantages that we can exploit. But in my opinion, I will much prefer to share our competitive advantages with our European partners that working in a mercantilist kind of logic. But if you got one country spending 300 or 200 million euros, the remaining people, something should be doing, anyone with the arms we got at our disposal.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So Maria, coming to you with the third point in Gonzalo's action plan, the need to work more on the interconnectedness between different European systems. We have a number of questions in the chat box about the extent to which it is useful to be investing in gas infrastructure to interconnect Europe now, because that could be used in the future for hydrogen, and the extent to which that is a reasonable argument to be putting forward for these kinds of investments now. Yeah, I'd be interested to sort of to get your take on whether or not those two things should be kept separate, which doesn't negate the case for either kinds of infrastructure at this point. But if you could unpack that for us a little bit, and please feel free as well to react to anything that you want to in the comments that we've heard from Joan and Gonzalo too.
Thank you, Susi. Well, I would like to react to Gonzalo's alternative. Either we go for an energy union or we play the energy island card, which is very provocative. I understand, and my reaction to that is that yes, Spain has a vast availability of renewable resources and land in order to produce cheap energy, so as to support the relocalization of energy-intensive industry in Spain and keeping jobs in Spain. This is an argument, but at the same time, when you see our other member countries, Germany increased its consumption of coal in the first half of this year by 20%, because they have few alternatives. So, I mean, I could expect. I started my introductory remarks with the statement that the energy price crisis is a strategic issue for the Europe of today and of tomorrow. And in this regard, if we do not, as a whole, as a union, give a strategic response in terms of a real energy union, we will not be able to fulfill our climate goals by 2030 for sure, and neither by 2050, because other member countries will not have the possibilities to replace Russian gas with clean energy. So I think this is a no-brainer in my view. Regarding the short-term issues, I think again we can discuss for ages the very short-term responses, but I think that what is and I'm convinced the European Commission is working properly in this. From this perspective, but what we are lacking really is the long-term view, the long-term strategic vision, and a reflection on what's required for years to come.
Thank you very much. As Gonzalo's politely put his hand up, I'm going to give him right of reply on this before coming back with a couple of other questions from the floor.
Yeah, very shortly. I mean, I just want to make it clear concerning Maria's comment that to me, the first best in economic terms, I mean, the optimal position is going for an energy union with integration. But if that door is closed, I mean, the second best for Spain will be that one. I mean, if you got a look of what is going on in Europe and the States, let's go, for instance, for refined products. I mean, Spain is one of the few countries in Europe where we still are competitive in refinery and this. Why? Because probably in the future we are going to be able to do it with green hydrogen. So this is kind of possibilities that we can have. But I fully agree with Maria, and I want to make it clear that my first best will be to have a functioning energy union. Maria, I'm totally with you.
No, I took it as a provocation. That is it.
No, we don't want a panel that agrees. There's no fun in that. So Joan, let's come back to you now, because we've got a couple of questions in the floor in the Q&A regarding the choices that we're making about connecting across Europe on energy at the moment. A question from Greenpeace about why focus on the H2 corridor? Why not? Wouldn't it make more sense economically to be spending on electricity interconnection and on promoting other renewable energy sources as a way of powering that? And then a question about nuclear power in the picture of this, and perhaps you could say a few words on the role that you see this playing in the European conversation now. Obviously, the sort of the painful discussions around the role of nuclear and gas in the EU's definitions of clean energy were prior to the current energy crisis that we're going through. Do you see that conversation as having changed at all now?
So again, a lot of the big issues.
I'm just giving you the easy ones.
No, it's good. It's good. So in terms of connection, I think that the short answer is that we're not focusing on the, at least from a government strategic perspective. We have been working with Paris, and by this I mean the French government, for years, actually decades, on increasing interconnection. Spain's national energy and climate plan pushes for a significantly increased interconnection. In fact, because of Spain's insistence, I guess, Spain's position on in the Council, in the EU, we have 2020 and 2030 interconnection targets between member states, which, as you know, we are nowhere near being able to meet. So there's a 10% interconnection target for 2020, which we're not meeting. We're around 2 to 3% when it comes to electricity, and that goes up to 15%. The target goes up to 15% by 2030, and again, we're far away from that. The thing is, obviously, the Spanish government has very little say in what happens across the border on the other side of the Pyrenees, so we can do whatever we have to, and whatever we can on our side, and then on the other side we can only talk in Madrid, talk in Paris, talk in Brussels with our colleagues, and try and have those conversations from a bilateral and from an international perspective. But indeed, I think electricity interconnection is hugely important, and all of our energy strategy is around that. However, and I think Maria was showing very interesting data on that, at the same time as that, it looks like being able to share electricity or share energy, renewable energy, in green molecules rather than green electrons, if my engineering colleagues will allow me, can be cheaper, or can be more cost efficient, or can be more energy efficient when it comes to that. And there's another issue. People, or Europe, won't necessarily need our energy when our energy is being generated. We will have a lot more wind, a lot more solar. A lot of Europe will be in the daytime at the same time as we are in the daytime. There's not enough spread, between east and west of Europe to have enough of a spread when it comes to solar power. So it will also make sense to convert some of that electrical renewable energy into other forms of renewable energy, such as hydrogen, to be shared. And additionally, assuming we still want to have international transport of goods, have international transport of people, have industry which builds things and makes things, such as towers for wind turbines and so on, we will need to decarbonize the industry. And there are a lot of things that you cannot do directly with electricity. You have to turn that electricity into other vectors. So instead of using natural gas, for example, we can use green hydrogen. So there is a point. Of course, we have been debating about hydrogen and gas, because that's the big worry at the moment with Putin shutting the pipes. But obviously, electricity is still there, and there's a lot to do there. And when it comes to the sub question, I guess, to do with promoting renewable energy sources. That's exactly what we've been trying to do. I think that it's interesting to have the conversation though on what are the issues slowing down new renewable energy deployments in Spain and abroad. And obviously developers need to be responsible and do their homework properly and not put forward irresponsible projects in the wrong places. And obviously the administration needs to move faster with permitting and do its homework a lot better. But also civil society, I think, needs to, put in their share, our share. I consider myself to be civil society outside of my job as well. When it comes to these things, when we say, yes, we want renewables, but not like this, or not in this particular place, we need to be aware that this delays renewable energy projects. The biggest single delay to renewable energy projects, unfortunately, is social opposition. Sometimes that is extremely justified with environmental concerns. Sometimes it's landscape, sometimes it's other sort of issues. So I think we all need to, make sure that we speed up renewable energy deployment. And sorry, to not take up too much time. When it comes to nuclear power, Spain is currently one of the biggest generators of nuclear power in Europe, but we do have a phase out plan which has been agreed between the companies. That is important because Spain is not like France. We are not a huge nuclear power in terms of industrial or basically safety capabilities. So if all of the companies decided to shut down their nuclear reactors at the same time in the same year, we would not have the technical capacity to safely manage the decommissioning of all those reactors. So it's important that they are spaced out, and because they are in time, those dismantling procedures. So that's why it's important that the companies come to an agreement. Energy generation, electricity generation in Spain and in Europe is liberalized. So any private company can come and say, I want to put forward a wind farm, a solar farm, a natural gas station, a nuclear power station. However, we have not had any companies come and say we are happy to put forward a nuclear project. Why? Because it's a huge investment, which is only recovered in the very long term, not necessarily cheaper than renewables. In fact, what we see from the numbers is that renewables are cheaper than nuclear power. And in any case, we can put renewable energy on the ground running a lot faster than nuclear power. So sure, we have a nuclear fleet, which we need to operate safely until it's time to decommission. However, I think that the way to accelerate our energy independence or reduce our external energy dependence is through renewables, not nuclear. By the way, I think something that's very, very eloquent, nuclear technology and uranium are not in any of the sanctions or proposed sanctions to Russia. So we also need to look at where do we get our uranium from? Again, in the same way as Spaniards and probably a lot of other Europeans, we don't like oil extraction, we don't like gas extraction. We probably don't like uranium mines either. So again, we need to look at where we're getting that uranium from, because maybe that doesn't give us as much energy independence as we might think. So I think the answer is renewables, which we have the technology for, we have the resource for. So for us, it's the cheapest and the fastest way to get going. So I think renewables is what we should focus on.
Thank you very much indeed. And actually, you've started to answer one of the questions that I was going to come on to now in terms of how we achieve Spain's goal of reducing external energy dependency below 61% by 2030. So maybe I'll offer that question to Gonzalo and Maria for your sense on this, because we have a question from Antonio Notario asking us, can we go faster? Is there a way that we can do more and get below 61% by 2030? And if so, what do we need to do to achieve that? Gonzalo, do you want to go first?
I don't know. I have no idea whether we can reach this 61 or not. I hope so. I mean, this is what we got in our PNIEC. I'm not that worried about what happens with the nuclear. I mean, I think, correct me, Jan, if I'm wrong, but what I understood is if one day we got a problem with energy supply, that will be a good way to postpone the phase out. I mean, it's not something that, I mean, if we are in an energy security problem, I mean, we will reconsider the phase out of one or two. I mean, the Germans has just postponed at least until April the functioning of 2 nuclear power plants. So, I mean, But I agree with Joan that nuclear is not the solution. But I mean, in the short run, perhaps for other countries that can, postpone the closing, like in Germany, you got 2 nuclear plants working for 1 more year. Perhaps it gives you some room. I'm not saying that's the Spanish case. I'm very much in the same position than Joan on nuclear. I don't see new nuclear plants in Spain being built, especially with the interest rate as they are rising these days. I mean, I won't put my money there. Regarding the other point you mentioned, Susi, was sorry.
No, I was just asking about your sense on whether or not that could be achieved more quickly, and if so, how.
Well, I mean, what you can do is true. What Jan says, that we have to accelerate permitting. Permitting, in my opinion, we got a problem in permitting. In my opinion, also with this generation funds, we also got a problem of administrative capabilities in the Spanish government. We have to reinforce that. So, I mean, the question with the energy sector is that you can find a market failure for every public sector failure, So, I mean, it's not a question of which failure is the bigger, but how we solve each of them, This is a technical approach, not a political, ideological approach. This is my opinion, Sorry if not everybody will agree with that. So, in my opinion, if we want to incentivize renewables, we cannot, penalize them, or we have to give a very clear horizon. Okay, we are taking some extraordinary measures nowadays. We are reducing your benefits. You are paying. Okay, that will be something temporary, but in 1-2 years' time, we will be, back fully blown with this. Something that also worries me in Spain is this dilemma, between, there are 2 dilemmas that for me are important. What you mentioned, it's short versus long term, but also the second one that is between public acceptance and permitting. If we go very fast on permitting, we can lose it on public acceptance, as Jan says before. And to me, something very important, because what are the public policies we are considering these days in the European Union and in Spain? Regulatory measures and market intervention. So these are the 2 kind of public policies we got. I mean, command and control measures and price intervention or taxes or whatever. But the third leg, as we say in Spain, el patito feo, I don't know what was the translation in English for that one. Probably Jan knows what that one, This ugly duck we got is the narratives, is what we call bottom-up or decentralized policies. That this is how we convince our citizens we have to save energy. We have not to take the car. We have to go for public transport. Take your bike, even if it's raining as today in Madrid. These kind of narratives are very important in order to solve the holes in our energy transitions between what our people want, because they are quite pro-ecological, and what they are ready to do. So to bridge this gap between the ambition and what we are really ready to do, we need a very strong messaging, not only from the government, but also from civil society, companies, and so on. And Jan, if you allow me, very small, tiny criticism, not to say that we think tanks are very much on the official line. My criticism to the Spanish government is we have a lot of command and control, but we have not been that efficient in sending society the message that we have to save. And the problem here in Spain is we got a highly polarized public opinion. If you are in the left and in the center, you can reach the people saying, save because this is against climate change. But we got people on the right,
to take the right with you as well.
Main thing is energy security. So we have to go to them with the message, for the security of all us, please don't drive that fast. Because you got these kind of people on the right that got what we call in behavioral economics control aversion. If you ask them to save, they are going to go faster. If you ask them to reduce the temperature, they are going to increase it. So we really need to fine-tune our messaging and try to be much more efficient and try to combine the Spaniards and the Europeans to save energy. And this is a contribution that will be very important
in Spain, because if one country can really save a lot of energy, that's Spain. Energy efficiency measures, all that. You know, this messaging, this
political signaling.
Important in my opinion.
Thank you very much indeed. So we're running up against the wire. I will give Joan, you wanted to just respond with 2 fingers on this, and then I'm going to give the final word to Maria, and no one will be able to disagree with her. So that's a luxurious position to have, Maria. So Joan, very briefly.
Literally 30 seconds. No, I appreciate, and in fact, I agree with the criticism by Gonzalo. I think one of the sort of, it should be low cost and easiest things to do, and fastest anyway, is you know, to persuade and to make society understand these sort of easy, it's maybe marginal savings, but it's fast and it's easy and it's effortless almost savings to be achieved. Unfortunately, we have an extremely polarized society, an extremely polarized political landscape. You know, if you ask people to stop eating sugar because it's unhealthy for them, they will go on social media with lots of chocolate biscuits around them. That is the level of the political debate in Spain. But unfortunately, even if and it's something we have to learn, because you know, society is very polarized, and we need to talk to all of society. But it's extremely difficult even if we put the climate message on the table, even if you put the security of supply, even if you put the solidarity message, our municipalities are full of Ukrainian flags. If you go around cities in Spain, you have the Ukrainian flag on municipalities, on public buildings, on shops. So people theoretically, and companies and political parties of all colors theoretically agree with the message that we have to be. However, you know, well, we sometimes I don't know. I think it's a bigger challenge, and it could probably go on for ages. It's a big challenge that we need to learn, and I think we probably need to read and discuss a lot more on how we can get that message to work, and how we can get political responsibles from across the political sphere to basically be responsible and co-responsible with this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. So Maria, last word to you. Feel free. I mean, the question I originally put to you was about the transition away from external dependence, and your sense on whether there's more that we could do to get there faster. But feel free if you want to have quick reactions to anything that has been said.
Thank you so much. 2 words. First, I couldn't agree more that we need to save energy. But let's be clear, this is not energy efficiency. This is energy conservation. That's another thing. The other nuance on yes, I fully agree. The renewables is the answer, but all renewables. Let's not forget, electricity is around 20% of the energy mix. We need to decarbonize the other 80%. Electrification, even in the net zero scenario, according to the IDAE, will reach 50%, half of the pie. The real challenge is on that side, and that's where hydrogen makes sense. There are also limits to accelerate the installation of renewables because of the trade-off between public acceptance and permitting, definitely, but also because renewables won't solve the problem. For electricity, renewables won't solve the problem by themselves per se. I show indeed a graph that clearly proves that transporting molecules is much cheaper, around 2 times, between 2 and 4 times, 3 times cheaper than transporting electrons, and therefore we need also to consider cost in the equation. And last but not least, a power sector, when electrification grows up to half of that pie, and renewable generation, variable renewable generation, makes for the bulk of the, or the whole of the supply, we will need hydrogen to balance the power system. It will be very difficult to manage and operate a power system without the storage opportunities and that a network of pipelines can provide, also to reduce peak demand. And yeah, for industry, I mean, the future of our industry in Europe is hinged on the ability of governments to develop something else for that hard to electrify sectors.
Thank you very much indeed. I think even if I had 10 minutes, I wouldn't be able to summarize such a rich discussion. So given that we're over time, I'm not even going to try. But I want to say thank you to all three of you for such generous contributions and for such an engaging discussion. I think we've clearly identified a number of pieces on which there is much more work to do. So hopefully we continue this conversation in the run-up to the Spanish presidency and in between, because clearly these are not issues that are going to go away. These are not challenges that are going to get any easier as we head into a cold winter. So thank you once again, and I wish you all a very good evening.